Hi everyone, my name is Chapman. I am standing in the Gallery of Arts on campus at the University of Montana in Missoula. I'm standing in my thesis show for my MFA called Ecology of Mourning. This show stemmed from my open air residency in the summer of 2024, I think. It's crazy that it's been that long already. And I was partnered with the Clark Fork Coalition and stayed in their field station in Galen, Montana, which is between Anaconda and Deer Lodge. And the Clark Fork Coalition, if you didn't know, is an environmental agency that's based in Missoula that has been helping clean up the contaminants in the Clark Fork River that came down like over 100 years ago from mining in Butte from a flood. So the whole show stemmed from that residency and learning about that contamination and the mining history and just the land in general. So yeah, I guess let's go into the work that I made there and what stemmed after that. So this line of prints, I started during the residency. I didn't make a ton of work during the residency because I did a lot of research and just spending time in that place. But I finished these after the residency and then embroidered and drew on them later on. But this is my direct view from our studio space. It was a sunroom off of the field station. And this was the view of the Flints and Pintlers from that window. And we were on a ranch, so we saw a lot of sheep. And they're just really fun to draw also. I did include the smokestack in here, but it's only I know. And you can barely see a little highlight, so no one else knows that, but I. So yeah, this I didn't really know what I wanted to make work about when I was there. I was just kind of letting it flow. I had a hard time in school, so I overthink a lot. So it was really nice to just do something different. And I'm usually a clay artist, but I got into print and it was hard to do clay there, so I just started printing, and I've spent a lot of time in Butte learning about the mining history and the contamination and how it's affected the ecosystem since 1908 when that happened. And I have friends on campus that study birds and mining contamination in that area, so that was really cool to just talk to them and just learn about other people who are kind of doing the same thing as me, but in a different medium or science. But yeah, anyway, these kind of are, I was thinking about ranching a lot when I made these, but they're not really about ranching, it's just about land use and seeing this land as this idyllic landscape, and it's really not if you think about the truth of it. And so I embroidered these human interventions on top of the landscapes with the head frame, and there's a billboard over here as well. And then I love birds, which you'll see this whole show is about birds. This is the only non-bird work. I drew bird specimens on top because of the contamination caused some of the birds to die and just affected their habitat. So we're going to move on to these pieces, which I like to call reliquaries, kind of between a sacred object but also scientific. So during my time in the residency, I learned about these areas of contamination called slickens, and it's where the heavy metals are concentrated that are still there today. And when it floods or there's spring runoff, sometimes it goes into the river and it can cause like fish kills and poisons the river more than the everyday. So a lot of these sites are public access along the river in the Deer Lodge Valley. And I collected soil from these spots, and they're totally devoid of life. Depending on how bad the contamination is, there's like copper crystals growing on the soil. Any like organic material that's in it turns like this bright turquoise blue. So some of this I collected from those spots that are already really blue. And then I collected soil from different spots, and they all kind of did different things. I did a lot of experiments with tap water, river water, different site soil. Some of it seemed more contaminated with copper than others. Like this one's kind of starting to turn. It's only been in there for a couple weeks. This has been in here for like 6 months, and it didn't turn blue, but it's growing algae. And like this isn't turned blue, but there's lots of scum. It just does really gross things, but it's also really interesting and also kind of beautiful at the same time. We're going to jump ahead a bit in timeline, but work is still stemmed from the open air residency because I think that I'm obsessed with that place, and that's all I think about all the time and dream about going back there, even though it's really probably not great for your health. So this is my favorite section of the show. It's the latest work that I made for the show. So the past 2 years on campus, I've been prepping birds for the Philip L. Wright Zoological Museum. Humble plug for them. And they're also a site for open air, which is awesome. And I've just made friends with the people that I prep with. And I'm not a science person. I like it, but I don't study it. I was the only non-science person in the group, the only artist. And it's been really fun because it's like an art in itself, and I get really obsessed about making them perfect. But yeah, I've learned all about anatomy of birds and how to collect data for birds. And the Zoological Museum is a sort of like archive for ecology. So there's specimens there. I don't know their oldest ones, but there are some from like the 19th century. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but this whole show is stemmed from the Victorian era, because I kind of connected that when I was in Butte with like when the Copper Kings were reigning over Butte was in the Victorian era, and when all of that pollution started was during that time. So I just went into a deep dive of Victorian times and natural history. And so they use these specimens as research to see how climate and just different ecological issues and just like evolution and how they change over time. And so it can help us protect the birds for the future. Normally you can't, like these birds are protected, so I can't show them myself. So I drew them instead. And I drew them during the prep process. And then I have birds sculpted that were pre-prep and then in prep process. And then I have the actual specimens that the museum loaned me for the show that I prepped myself. And so these birds I have in here. So this was during like the beginning of the prep when you first cut the bird open. And this is cotton in the center, so you stuff them with cotton and then sew them back up. So that was that process. And here is the finished process. So I'm going to very carefully. So this is a sharp-shinned hawk. I don't remember the exact the cause of death, but can you see it? It was most likely human caused. A lot of these are window strikes. And so this is this bird. And then one more, and then I won't touch them again. And this is a northern flicker. They're very common around here. And this is this. They look very different.
Hey Lane, does drawing a bird feel different after you've been like inside and like, can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm, sometimes I try to be loose but I'm not. I like to draw really tight and realistically in like every feather. And it's harder with prints, which sometimes I don't know why I do. But I love it. And yeah, it helped me draw more accurately because I could actually feel and touch, and they let me take reference photos. And it is, yeah, because like now when I draw a bird head, I like can imagine the anatomy inside of it. It also really helped me sculpt them more accurately as well, because like sometimes in photos you can't really see the details of like shadows and highlights. And I also draw, so I draw my birds before I sculpt them, and then I sculpt from my drawings because I can see the detail better, and I like have the memory of doing that. These I kind of made toward the end too. A lot of this work I made like since January. But yeah, so because I am interested in the Victorian era, I was looking a lot at graveyards and cemeteries and monuments that are above graves and what those mean. And at first this was going to be an urn with a shroud over it, which is it symbolizes between life and death. But then I was like, that doesn't really make any sense with my work. So I decided to go more like literal with the mining. So I got these copper nuggets. I think they're actually from Michigan. But I have these hanging around as like showing the copper, and there are like little green bits in here. And then I welded some head frames and put on top of this. And I'm still trying to figure out how to talk about this piece, but just as like a monument to progress, but in a negative way. And also just as like a memorial for what this industry has destroyed. And in the bottom is soil I collected from along the Clark Fork River. And it's hard to tell looking at it now, but if it does get wet, you can see the green and the copper in it. And it's pretty, I was a little worried about putting it in here. It's pretty safe as long as you don't touch it, eat it, snort it. But yeah, I learned how to weld for this, which was really fun. Still about birds, even though there's no birds. And then we can come over to the wall. And so most of these, but every bird but two are birds that I've prepped that are in those cases before prep. So what they look like before they're cut open to prep. And I put them on these concrete pillows because one, I just didn't want to use like actual pillows. I just wanted like to stick with the kind of more industrial type objects or materials. But this whole show is about mourning and grief and ecological death, and how we don't really have a connection to that because it's so broad and like sublime that we don't really see it happening in real time. I feel like maybe we are now that it's progressing, but I just think a lot about like how distant we are from death, and like if we're distant from our loved ones dying, then we're definitely distant from birds dying that you don't see all the time. And so I wanted to show like one, how beautiful these birds are, but two, just like how much care and time goes into prepping a bird, and like how that brings me into this intimacy of death and like human caused death too. And I still haven't figured out if it's making me more like reverent or like desensitized because I'm not grossed out by it anymore. But it's just been really powerful prepping the birds and then making work about like my experience with that, and then my experience with the open air residency. I didn't mention this earlier, but all the birds in the show are from that area, or at least like native to that area, and Montana itself.
And what are we looking for? We can't totally see, but they're not actual birds.
No, they're sculpted birds with clay.
And how did you sculpt them, just from looking at them?
Yeah, so I sculpt these from my drawings usually. I do reference photos online, or I take a lot of close-ups of the birds I prep too, so I can see the details in their beaks and eyes to make them look realistic and dead, but still sort of peaceful. And then they're soda fired with just a flat, like, it's called a slip, that's black and red. I didn't want to do realistic colors, it just felt kind of too much on the nose. Because they are specific birds, but they're also symbolizing like the whole ecology of that ecosystem. And yeah, just showing my appreciation for those birds. So Carrie's asked for a sum up, and I feel like I've been rambling, so I'm going to try to not make this rambling. So basically this whole show is a accumulation of my 3 years in grad school. And the open air residency was during that time, it was after my first year. And yeah, I was just really, truly inspired by that place, and I'm obsessed with it, and I go back there a lot to bird at the Warm Springs ponds. I was able to stay at the field station again last summer in August for a few days, and that was really, really incredible to be back there and just see like what's changed, what hasn't, see the birds again. I'm hoping to go back soon. And yeah, I wanted to finish with a little more hopeful pieces because the birds are alive on these. And they're just shown with human-made elements of industry and progress and like development of land. And how I see these more as like urns, but also like celebratory of these birds adapting to a new ecosystem that they're forced into, and that they're persevering mostly, hopefully for the future. And I just didn't want to end on a very sad, depressing, everything's dying note, because I don't think we need to lose hope, because there's still hope. And I love birds.